But Trevor, your question is, do tax increases have an impact on the economy? Of course they do. But imagine if I'd have done something else last October. Imagine if I'd have swept the problems under the carpet and said everything was fine. Then today, when we face the aggression from Russia, we wouldn't have the additional money to spend on defence. We would be in a situation where NHS waiting lists will continue.
It's not additional money. You took it out of overseas aid. It's not additional money. You took it out of the international aid budget.
Yes, we made that decision, but if the public finances weren't on a firm footing, we'd have to be raiding budgets to prop up the public finances. Instead, we were able to redirect money from international development to defence spending.
Rachel Reeves' recent appearance on Trevor Phillips's show raised more than a few eyebrows. She confidently dismissed a report from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which warned that living standards are set to fall drastically over the next 5 years.
The point I really wanted to ask you about is to describe how serious you think it is. The Joseph Rowntree Trust Foundation today predicts a huge fall in living standards by the end of this Parliament.
I reject that.
You think they're just wrong?
I reject that. And the Office of Budget Responsibility will set out their forecast this week. Living standards in the last Parliament were the worst ever on record. The Office of Budget Responsibility forecast in October that living standards would increase at double the rate in this Parliament.
Experts warn of worsening conditions, especially for the poorest. But Reeves claims the economy is improving and living standards will rise. Her confident words sparked backlash. How can she ignore the reality of millions struggling with rising costs and stagnant wages? Is her optimism out of touch with the facts?
But if you look at wages at the moment, wages are rising today at twice the rate of inflation. That is very different from what we saw under the previous government.
But just to be clear, you're saying that you simply don't think that living standards are going to fall. In fact, you're suggesting that they're rising now and they'll continue to rise. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm confident that we will see living standards increase during the course of this Parliament. What we've already seen in these last few months of the Labour government is a sustained increase in living standards.
Joseph Rowntree Foundation's latest report paints a grim future for the UK, especially for the most vulnerable. Living standards are set to plummet over the next 5 years, with the poorest hit hardest. Poverty, especially among working families, is predicted to rise as wages stagnate and inflation drains budgets. Despite promises of recovery, many are seeing their real incomes shrink, struggling to afford essentials like food, energy, and housing.
Situation.
I'm not going to preempt the Office of Budget Responsibility's forecast, but the world has changed. We can all see that before our eyes. And government are not inactive in that. We'll respond to the change and continue to meet our fiscal rules, but we're also shaping the new world, whether that's in the defence and security realm or indeed on the economy. I promised at the general election to bring stability back to the economy. As a result of that stability, interest rates have been cut 3 times since the general election.
The cost of living crisis is set to worsen, with rising prices outpacing any income gains, even as inflation slows. Financial strain on households won't ease anytime soon. The foundation warns that the government's policies may not be enough to reverse these trends, and that immediate action is crucial. This report is a wake-up call for policymakers to confront the harsh reality. Many families are falling behind. Without bold, immediate action, the UK risks deepening poverty for a large portion of its population.
A money expert, of course, she has boxed herself in. She is in a terrible situation. And the headline this morning is she is going to order the civil service to save £2 billion a year. And of course, the unions are railing against it. They say, well, we're going to lose tens of thousands of jobs from the government. So the Chancellor and Pat McFadden, who's the Cabinet Office Minister, is going to tell all departments they have to cut administrative costs by 15%. And rightly, they're saying, look, this needs to come away from HR, office management, comms, and make sure you preserve those key essential services, which I think is the right thing. She is telling them they need to tighten their departmental budgets by $5 to $6 billion a year, on top of the $4 billion cuts to benefits, which has already been announced. She hasn't got much fiscal headroom, has she?
No.
Rachel Reeves quickly dismissed the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's stark warnings about the future of living standards. In a recent recent interview, she confidently claimed that living standards would improve under the current government, despite overwhelming evidence of families struggling. She argued the economy is recovering, wages are rising, and inflation is slowing. Yet these claims starkly contrast with the reality of rising costs and stagnant wages.
We've got 203,000 businesses having folded since Labour took power. The number of young people claiming benefits now has shot up. You're asking people to come off benefits and go into work, and yet Rachel Reeves came up with a budget in the autumn which has absolutely clobbered businesses. Businesses are now saying we're reluctant to hire because we're paying far too much in national insurance contributions. So you're trying to get people into work, but you're not facilitating businesses to hire them. You're clobbering business.
Reeves' response seemed to downplay the severity of the crisis. While experts warn that poverty is set to rise, particularly among the most vulnerable, she focused instead on optimistic predictions about wage increases and economic growth. This upbeat tone ignored the fact that inflation is still outpacing wage growth, meaning most people's real incomes are shrinking, not growing.
0.7% increase in their wages, £1,400 more a year. That's only possible because of the stability that we have returned to the economy. And of course, those three cuts in interest rates from the Bank of England mean that mortgage rates are lower than they otherwise would have been. We've got to do more, absolutely, in terms of raising living standards. But this government have already got started in delivering our plan.
By insisting that living standards are improving, despite clear evidence to the contrary, Reeves risked seeming out of touch with everyday struggles. Her denial of the facts didn't just feel disconnected, it suggested she was prioritizing political rhetoric over the real challenges millions of working families face. Reeves' statements on inflation, wages, and economic growth were full of contradictions. While claiming improvement, experts and data painted a different picture. She pointed to rising wages but ignored that these increases lag behind inflation, causing real incomes to shrink and making it harder for people to keep up with rising costs.
Well, look, there's a bit that you can say the picture you just painted, but there's a different way of seeing this. Inflation isn't coming down as fast as you hoped it was.
Well, again, the Office of Budget Responsibility will do their forecast.
Well, they'll do that. Well, I'm just never mind the forecast. Let's look at what's happened already. Inflation's not coming down at the rate you hoped it was. Interest rates are being held; they're not coming down. The growth figures are absolutely flat, and per capita growth is actually falling. Are you being a bit complacent about where we are now?
I know that we need to go further and faster in delivering economic growth and seeing public services improve. But there are no shortcuts here. It's the hard yards that are necessary.
But if you want to do people to do the hard yards, you have to convince them, surely, that the situation demands it. And what we're hearing this morning from you, I'm afraid, is one that says, actually, it's kind of okay, don't worry too much.
She downplayed the ongoing inflation crisis, claiming it's dropping faster than it actually is. In reality, inflation remains stubbornly high, and many households are still struggling with basic expenses. By focusing on optimistic projections without acknowledging daily hardships, Reeves painted a picture that felt disconnected from the truth. Her insistence that living standards are rising seemed more like wishful thinking than an accurate reflection of the economic reality many are facing. This false optimism sharply contrasted with the concerns raised by experts.
The growth numbers have come in higher than many expected, but I'm still not satisfied with the level of growth that our economy is achieving, and that's why I am determined to go further and faster in delivering the economic growth and the improvements in living standards that our country deserves.
No, listen.
You say the growth figures are higher than expected, but your government promised Britain it would be the fastest growing country in the G7.
It did.
6 months in, and we're barely just growing. Today's figures.
Despite Rachel Reeves' claims that living standards are improving, the reality is far from optimistic. For many households, inflation remains high, still outpacing wage growth by a significant margin. As of recent reports, inflation is hovering around 10%, while wages have only seen a modest increase of about 5 to 6%. This gap means that most people's real purchasing power is shrinking, leaving them struggling to cover everyday expenses like food, energy, and housing.
Particularly in terms of tax.
But that's not what I'm asking about. The message you were giving, and the Prime Minister, through the autumn was, it's terrible, it's awful, we have to do all sorts of things. Did you overdo the pessimism?
No, we took the action that was necessary to ensure that our public services and public finances were on a firm footing. And the tax, the national insurance, the non-dom tax, the VAT on private schools, that money has been used to both secure the public finances and to put more than £20 billion into the National Health Service, which is why for 5 months in a row now we've seen NHS waiting lists decline. It's why
Reeves' failure to acknowledge the widening gap between wages and inflation during her interview is striking. Instead of addressing the real financial strain faced by families, she continued to focus on inflated projections of economic recovery. This oversight creates an inaccurate picture of the current economic reality, ignoring the fact that rising prices are far outpacing wage gains for many, and the situation is only getting worse. Before taking office, the Labour Party made bold promises to ease the burden on working-class families, including freezing council taxes to relieve households already struggling with the cost of living. Yet just months into their leadership, this promise has been broken. Rather than freezing taxes, many local authorities under Labour-run councils have raised them, adding more strain to already stretched families.
Not hikes in interest rates, and wages are rising faster than inflation. That was not the case in the previous Parliament, which was the worst on record for living standards. But are you saying, do we need to do more to grow the economy, to address the cost of living crisis? Absolutely we do. That is why we are reducing bureaucracy and regulation. It's why we are reforming the pension system to bring more money into the economy and so much more.
I want to come to what you're going to do, but I just want to get clear on what you think the problem that you're solving is. Has the economy declined, got worse, more difficult since you came to office, or not?
The economy is not growing fast enough. I'm not satisfied.
These broken promises are being seen as a betrayal by many working-class voters who trusted Labour to prioritize their needs. The promise of no extra council tax increases was a key point in Labour's campaign, yet the reality has been quite different. For many, rising taxes feel like another blow, especially when wages are stagnant and inflation continues to eat away at their incomes. The gap between Labour's pre-election promises and post-election actions has left many disillusioned, questioning whether the party is truly on their side. What was once a hopeful vision for change now feels like empty rhetoric. Meanwhile, public services under the Labour government are in crisis. Local councils responsible for essential services like social care, schools, and waste management are facing chronic underfunding. As costs rise, these councils are forced to make tough choices, either cut back on vital services or increase taxes to cover the shortfall.
These figures are a bit of a fake.
Let's have it right. The only growth that we've seen is the MP pay rises. A lovely 2.8% pay increase, which will probably take them to around £100,000. Add their allowances and their expenses on top, they'll be earning staggering amounts of money. Basically getting a pay increase for failing. Are they not failing? Are they excelling? Not in my...
The root of the problem lies in years of austerity measures that left local authorities with limited resources. Now, with the cost of living crisis deepening, the pressure on these councils has only intensified. Despite Labour's promises to improve public services, many are still underfunded and stretched to breaking point. This has led to growing frustration from the public, who are facing longer waiting times, reduced services, and higher taxes. Labour's failure to address this issue has left many questioning the party's commitment to solving the very problem they promised to fix. The lack of meaningful change in public services is not just disappointing, it's fueling a growing sense of disillusionment among voters who feel let down by the government's inaction.
I will say this first of all, this is a thankless task of being Chancellor.
It's
to try
a
and
rubbish
fiddle,
job.
Absolutely, it's not one I'm putting myself forward.
You'd be good though.
I don't know about that. Look, I think there's a little bit, so this whole fiscal headroom stuff that they're talking about.
Do you want to explain that?
Not really.
No,
but I will do
hang on
my very best.
Hasn't she imposed these rules? She herself has imposed these rules, and therefore she has, in some ways, boxed herself.
Council tax increases are set to hit households hard, adding even more pressure to families already struggling with the cost of living. Starting in April, many households will see their council tax rise by up to 5%, adding an average of £79 to the annual bill for a typical Band D property for families already grappling with higher food, energy, and housing costs. This tax hike feels like an extra blow.
Right. Let's move on, shall we, and talk about about the economy. The official economic growth forecast for 2025 is going to be halved next week in a blow to Keir Starmer. This is the OBR. Now, the OBR tends to be rather optimistic in its outlook. It's going to reduce our economic growth forecast from 2% to 1%. Then you've got Rachel Reeves is going to do the spring statement. Now, I am going to bet my bottom dollar she is going to blame Donald Trump and global economic uncertainty for the pickle that she is in.
Politically, this creates a major headache for Labour. The party has long promised to ease the burden on working families, but this tax rise directly contradicts that message. Critics argue this move betrays their working class base, especially when Labour councils are the ones raising taxes. The opposition is quick to exploit this, accusing Labour of breaking its promises and failing to tackle the cost of living crisis effectively. Local governments are under immense pressure due to years of funding cuts, leaving them with few options but to raise taxes. However, this situation underscores a deeper issue: how austerity measures have left councils struggling to provide essential services without increasing the financial burden on their residents.
Okay, let's be clear. You did raise national insurance tax. Leave aside what that does to your conscience on whether you've broken a pledge or not. Tax experts have told us this is one of the worst taxes to increase. On employers, it just discourages hiring, it encourages avoidance, it depresses longer-term wages. Why would you do that?
Labour's response to the UK's economic challenges is weak, relying more on vague promises than real solutions. Instead of addressing immediate issues like inflation and stagnant wages, they offer empty optimism. Rachel Reeves' rhetoric feels disconnected, leading many to see her and the party as out of touch with reality. If you enjoyed, leave a like and subscribe to our channel. You can watch more videos from us here at